Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Cilinix Crypto here. Hope you're all doing great and welcome to this new Friday evening update on the markets. We're going to do a full update, so we'll talk a little bit about the news that we had today. Today we had some major news. The outcome was almost completely as expected. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's why we haven't had major volatility. We did have some very high volume. We will talk about that as well. But this video will probably not be too long. I'm quite tired, to be fair. So you might see that in the video as well. But I'll still try to tell you everything that you need to know, right? So don't worry, we'll go over it. But okay, so let's start with the news. We'll start with the news, then we'll talk about my expectations for Bitcoin. We'll talk about my expectations for Ethereum, or at least some things that I think you need to know. Some things you need to know regarding XRP, and then some altcoins. Although I must say that there's not a lot of altcoins at this point of time that I would jump into. And I would also not spend too much time on that. Most altcoins at this point of time, at least for the majority of the time, are just following Bitcoin, right? So there are definitely some altcoins that are a bit stronger and some altcoins that are a bit weaker. I'll tell you which ones are strongest. But I would still be relatively risk averse, aka cautious. But okay, so the news that we had today was the PCE price index. That's basically inflation rate data. And as you can see, most of the results, if you look at the consensus, so that's the expectation, and then the actual data, most of it was as expected. Personal spending was a little bit higher than expected, and personal income as well. That's not great, but then we did have a revised previous data point with the core PCE price index month on month. Revised down to 0.2%. So that's slightly bullish, but that altogether, that means that it's neutral, right? I mean, we had some data that was a little bit higher than expected, which was not what we wanted. We had some data that was a little bit lower than expected, which was what we wanted. I would, in the end, so I'd say it's neutral, but in the end, one of the key things that I always look at is the probability of the rate cuts for the rest of 2025. And you can see that the probability of a rate cut in October has increased a little bit over the course of today. And the probability of getting 2 rate cuts for the remainder of 2025 has also increased slightly. So that's okay. That's fine. That's mildly bullish, but ultimately we haven't seen much of a reaction from Bitcoin. As you can see, we're relatively stable since we spiked down here 24 hours ago. My expectations for Bitcoin are quite clear. We are at a major support level. If you look at the 3-day time frame, you can see we're at a high time frame demand zone, support level, whatever you want to call it. I'd call it a demand zone, but then we also have the 3-day uptrend here, and we have the 0.618 VIP. So we have a very strong support level. The fundamentals around the markets outside of the news are not bad. If you take a look at the S&P 500, we've basically respected the uptrend, and we've actually had a good day. So that's not bad. The volatility index is decreasing as well, so there's less unrest in the world, or at least the market. Well, I mean, it's a good proxy for that. So I would say, and then as a cherry on top of the cake, by the way, last thing, then I'll tell you what I expect. We also had a super high volume move today, 1 hour into the US session, and that was bought up almost immediately. Like, you can look at the 15-minute time frame right here, and you can see a lot of volume, and all of that volume was with candles down, but basically all above 108.8 thousand buyers did step in. So that's actually relatively positive, and that makes me say that when we're talking about at least this weekend, I do expect somewhat of a recovery. So into 110.6, possibly all the way into the naked point of control on this level right here at 112,000. Although that seems a little high potentially after such a bearish week. So I'm actually relatively optimistic about Bitcoin for the weekend. I'm less optimistic about Ethereum and XRP. XRP really needs to reclaim 2.82 and 2.8. The longer we don't do that, the more bearish I will become. So at this point of time, I still do think that XRP will be able to do something like this. Maybe not that high, but something like this. But it's tricky. And when we're looking at Ethereum, sure, I mean, if Bitcoin is going to get relief, Ethereum is going to get relief as well, but I still think we're going to drop down lower into this main support level we have between 3,800 and 3,700. And when we're talking about altcoins, I mean, it's the usual suspects. So basically the coins that were quite strong in September are also still holding on relatively well right now. So then we're talking about AFAX is very strong. But all of these coins have fallen down a lot, right? So that is something to be aware of. AFAX quite strong. Solana recovering quite well. Sui is actually quite strong as well. Near, BitTensor. But all of these, I would be careful with it, right? Because you can see that all of these coins that are recovering relatively well right now, that's a good sign. But all of them are heading for major resistance levels, like $29 and $30 for AFAX. With Solana, I think it's around $200, of course. And with BitTensor is also heading into a major resistance level right here at $310. So the main thing I want to tell you is be careful, all right? I do expect some recovery. I do expect some relief over the course of the weekend, but that doesn't mean that much. And I think it's still best to be cautious and neutral in terms of bias on the market. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching, everybody. Take care and bye.